Hey everybody, good evening. I'm Ethan Evans, the Easy Coach, and tonight we have special guest Lou Castle. Say hello, Lou.
Hello.
So Lou works with me at Amazon Games, but he's here tonight with a long history. I'll let him run you through some of it. He's worked in my opinion, every possible role. So not only well known for co-founding Westwood Studios, eventually acquired by EA, and his work with the Command and Conquer franchise. But he's worked in Las Vegas making gaming machines. He's worked outside of the industry. Within games, he's been a programmer, he's been an artist, he's been a producer, an amazing, deep history. Good to see you, Matchstick Man, Ethernight, the Rex. You said you're looking forward to the stream. Good to see you. So, as always, of course, we're question driven. And Lou's here to answer any question wide open within the rules of our usual. We don't talk about Twitch or Amazon internals or policy. So that's just not stuff we cover here. We don't get into. But he's happy to talk about any of the games he's made. I'll probably kick off the first couple questions talking about working in the game industry, but from there we can go to anything the audience wants to talk about. So, as most of the veterans know, for us to talk about something, you have to ask questions in the stream. Use the extension that's available either on the web in the browser or available on mobile or through the web interface. And Matchstick Man, I think all of our commands, our chatbot commands, are moderator only. So I'm not sure. Shadow's there, so she can pop stuff up for us on the question widget. Shadow Fox, our lead moderator, and if not, I can walk down and do it. There you go. So that's how you ask questions. So with that in mind, while we wait for questions to come in, a couple. Sorry about that. I was just posting we were live. So thank you, Shadowfox. Appreciate it. So, Lou, the first thing you and I talked about on the car ride over from the office was what's different about making games now as opposed to your long history. Like, how is working in the game industry changed?
I'd say the biggest change is that you have a much closer connection to the consumers. So, even back when I first started making games, you kind of almost knew by name because you would mail your when I go way back, we used to mail our games in plastic bags, but now you actually have this direct connection that's live with lots of consumers. You can get a lot of you get to know your customer a lot better, and the fact that you have a lot of data about what they're actually doing. So back in the day, you kind of had to guess or ask people's opinion on what they liked or didn't like, and now you can actually measure what people are doing in your game. You can find out what they like based on their feet, as it were, or what their clicks are, and you can actually have that connection directly with the people and get their feedback directly. So I think that's the biggest change, and I think that many designers and many producers like myself that have been around a long time now embrace the fact that we are working with the community to build our products instead of just building them in an isolated box and hoping they like them.
Okay. Awesome. Then what? Because a lot of viewers of the Easy Coach tend to be earlier in their career. There's a lot of college students, people just learning, considering going into different jobs. There are some folks who are interested in the game industry. What would you say, if anything, has changed about how to enter or to come out of education and into games?
Well, that's changed quite a bit as well. Obviously, you have a lot of universities that have game industry degrees, programming classes and programming degrees that focus on the games industry. Just the use of the cloud computing, systems programming, and things like that. So there's other types of skills. I'd say probably the specialization across the industry too. Back when I started, you had to be a generalist. You pretty much had to do everything.
Right.
So it was more like being an indie developer today. But I would say even indie developers today have a lot of ability to specialize that you didn't have back then, because you can come with a game engine. You can oftentimes just modify something that's already there. You don't have to come up with things whole cloth right from the beginning. So from an education point of view, I don't think that's changed a lot. I've always advised people to get a university education, especially if you want to be a designer. because the access or the exposure to lots of different disciplines comes in very handy. And I was a fine arts and computer science when I went to university. I was
Yeah, we talked about
kinda
that.
crazy.
There aren't a lot of people that double major or double degree in fine arts and computer science.
yep.
That's a fairly. It's one of the reasons I wanted to have Lou on the show. Is I thought, wow, from a career viewpoint, there's so many questions you guys could ask about a background. Where the other thing I learned about Lou is after studying in fine arts and computer science. And that's someone, I did computer science and I struggled to draw a straight line using a ruler. So that seems very challenging to me. But beyond that, he then acted as CFO for what? Was it Westwood or?
Well, Westwood originally, and then later I was on the board of directors for a public company, and I became an audit chair and got my certified financial advisor. So
Yeah, it
I
blows
definitely have the finance background as well. Yeah.
And that can't have come though from either computer science or
No,
fine
no,
arts.
it was learned on the job at Westwood. As you know, I started as a quote CFO of Westwood. We were 29 people and a checkbook, but we grew to 250 people, and we had products shipping in 70 different countries. We had FX that we had to track. I had to report up into various different kinds of accounting structures, and so I learned how to reconcile the accounts on a monthly basis and stuff that's probably not interesting to this group. But I learned an awful lot about finance.
Awesome. So thanks, everybody. I see you've put the first questions into our extension. Now everybody who's watching needs to go vote because it's the usual thing I tell you. Nobody's voted, so the first person to vote gets to pick what we answer. And so we'll jump to questions there in just a second. I'll buy a little time for the people who want to vote by talking about, I'll be doing my next stream. Devin Nash and I will go live on Labor Day. And we'll go in the morning. We haven't set an exact time. If you're a Nash Nation fan watching here, you know Devin's absolutely never late. # never late. So it'll be sometime in the morning, which means probably before noon, and I don't make any promises beyond that. Other than that, okay, there's tons of people who want to talk about this top question. So let's go ahead and pin that and display it in the stream. But I'll read it off here. The first question is, what is your take on crunch in the development of video games? And it's a multi-part question. Are there good policies or systems the management of video game companies could employ to stop most of the crunch happening today? All right, well, we love controversial questions here.
Happy with that one.
And so that's a good one.
So-
Take it away.
Yeah, so my philosophy has always been, when it comes to crunch, you can't stop it because this is an industry of hobbyists that are very passionate about what they do. And given the opportunity to put in extra effort to make a better product, fix an extra bug, do something more, make that artwork just a little bit better, or refine that design, I find that people will continue to put in lots and lots of effort, especially when time is limited. So what I can say is, from a policy point of view, I find it pretty unconscionable for people to count on that. I think if you schedule the time, that's a reasonable amount of time, and people are allowed to do the estimates of their own work, and then if they choose to do extra work, if they choose to put in that extra effort, they get to sort of self-direct on some of the things they get to put some energy into. That's the best way to manage it. But as far as like life balance, I get to do something I love to do every single day. I don't love everything I do every day, but to me that is life balance. That is turning your hobby into a job. Is the benefit is you get to do what you like to do. The con to that is that you tend to do more than most people would think would be reasonable.
Right. So actually, this is something we don't talk about Twitch internals, but I can share. This is one of the things we see very much paralleled in Twitch streamers.
Yeah.
Twitch streamers tend to stream a lot, and there is this challenge that as long as streaming more will tend to get you better performance because you're on more, because your fans can find you more, because it exposes you to new people and new geographies or different time zones, there will be some people who will stream more. And there's a couple leading streamers who have streamed, at this point, multiple years of every single day.
It's crazy.
And oftentimes also there's a couple leading streamers that average nearly 10 hours a day live. Yeah. So, huge amounts of time, but what we're trying to do at Twitch is make it so that that isn't necessary, but you can't eliminate what people want to do voluntarily.
Right.
And so that's a common. I think that's similar to what you're saying here.
It is very similar. I would actually add too. Funny enough, I found less crunch once games as a service started coming around. So because that's a marathon and not a sprint, when you're making a packaged goods game that's going to be one time, it's kind of cast in stone. And you have patches and things like that. But back in those days, your cartridge was going to go out, your CD was going to get burned. I mean, you didn't have another opportunity to put in that extra effort. That thing was cast in stone. The minute it was shipped, that was your art. And so people just really go that extra mile, and the companies kind of are expected to do everything they possibly can to make that product as good as it can be the day that it gets released. And I think that I've seen over the years, now that we have a lot more games as a service, you have to have a little bit more pacing there. Nobody can sprint forever. You have to kind of get into a cadence where you'll still have little ups and downs, but you have to let go every now and then and back off on the gas. So the question, I think, is that it's changed. I don't think you'll ever eliminate it as long as people who are passionate about what they do. It's not different than other entertainment industries, as you mentioned, streamers. The same thing with actors and people who
Some musicians,
musicians.
touring on the road all the time. So I do agree with you though that games as a service has changed the get it out for holiday or die crunch, which
Right.
actually was the origin of
really
maybe
painful.
the worst crunches in the past. So I forgot we kind of skipped over some of your background. So do you want to take a quick rundown of the major things
Sure.
you've done?
So I started Westwood Studios when I was 20 years old. My first game was in '82. Was way before Westwood was in '83 or '85. Sorry. Made a few games before even Westwood, and we used to do port work in the beginning. So I was a programmer and an artist. Then as the company grew, I took over the technology design for a lot of the early stuff that we did. I wrote a lot of the low-level code for Westwood for many years. I was our 3D programmer. I did video compression, things like that, digital signal processing. From an art point of view, I was the art director for many years until we got bigger and had more people. I was operations. I ran operations for the company until we were acquired by Electronic Arts. So that was many years later, '98. So
15 years almost.
Yes,
13 years.
got a
something
long
like that.
time. Yeah. So then we went into. I got into finance because we got acquired by Virgin, and so I was the CFO and the COO. I still executive producer on a lot of games and still very heavily involved, even coding to some extent because I would do some of the low-level code, that some interesting algorithms and stuff. It was nice to be king because you get to decide what you get to work on. It was a lot of fun. And we become part of Electronic Arts. We eventually closed Las Vegas Westwood. I became the chief creative officer for Electronic Arts in California and worked with the teams that did the Medal of Honors and a lot of other games there. Westwood games would be like Lion King, Blade Runner, Monopoly, Command and Conquer, the Kyrandia series. If you go back far enough, Lands of Lore, Dragon Strike was Dragon Flight Simulator. We used to do the Epix games which were sports games. That's how Westwood started. We actually, very, very first thing we started was porting some role-playing games. So I've done all kinds of games. At Electronic Arts, I worked with Steven Spielberg on a game called Boom Blocks, which was the inspiration for Angry Birds. Their interviews, not mine. And so then after that, I went to work for IAC, and I ran Instant Action and Garage Games for a while. We did game streaming way back before it was cool like it is now. And we were doing a background streaming, so it was kind of a different way a different take on that. After IAC, I became the vice president of product for Zynga and did casual games over at Zynga. We did Instant Action, which had these really cool music games for IC. And then after that, I was an independent contractor, worked for Kabam, Funny or Die, a bunch of other companies, and eventually Kixeye, which did mobile games, and ended up at Amazon running the game studio in Seattle. So I've been through a lot of different roles. In parallel of that, I actually worked as a director for a public company and eventually became the chief strategy officer for Shufflemaster, which makes the shufflers for casino games as well as slots and table games for casinos. And so I ran all of R&D, oversaw the building of our online gaming platform, and did mergers and acquisitions. So
Wow.
I've done a lot of different things over my years.
That's amazing, actually. By comparison, by the way, if you look at what I've done, it's very linear. Always working basically in e-commerce with a couple of deviations. So, if you have career questions that fit with Lou, feel free to put those in. We're also happy to talk about all of his game history and things he's made, different opinions on games. I see some of those questions are in. For everybody who's joined us, because I see the stream count's grown. We're doing a Ask Me Anything with Lou Castle, who currently works at Amazon Games with me, but has a lot of history at Westwood. We just popped up in chat where to ask questions. I also did see our moderator Shadow Fox was sharing, because she streams as well. You should check out her streams. She used to stream 12 hours and cut it to 7 to get to sanity. And it is true. One of the things I find at Amazon, I tell people, whether in video games or not, from a career viewpoint, game companies, any company, basically any company with a few exceptions, will take from an employee whatever they will give. Mm-hmm. The company itself, the people at the company may have a soul, and the company may have policies, but generally, if you will work more, particularly for the same money, the company will graciously accept that.
Yes, exactly.
And if you do it well, they may rate you well and they may promote you. But very few companies are at all good at saying, you're doing too much, please go home. It does happen. If you think somebody's health is in jeopardy or something, it may happen.
We've done it a few times.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been involved in a couple of cases where we did interventions.
Correct.
It's like we are literally going to turn off your account now. You've got to go, and then they go and work on their own time and do something else.
Right, and it's like pushing, it's like squeezing the balloon. It just moves somewhere. It's very hard.
I want to say you're welcome, NetCurse, who said thank you for the Westwood Games.
Yeah, and I think you probably know this, but the Wrench is Twitch staff, so that's somebody inside the Twitch staff.
Oh, that's nice, cool.
So anyway, we can roll to the next question, but again, there's a bunch of questions in, and I don't know how many you've approved, but
6 or 7.
Yeah, so there's 6 or 7 questions approved, but they all have low votes. So if you want to discriminate what we talk about, you need to go in and vote. So with that said, this next question is a good one if long. Well, let's see. What are things to look for when going into the games and gaming industry as a college graduate? We talked about how to get in the education. I guess this question is more about what to look out for. What would you say there?
Wow, look out for like pitfalls or something?
Yeah, I think it's pitfalls or how to choose where to go.
Well, I mean, the thing I always tell, get to the company that you respect, start with your wish list and go down and try to be pretty selective about the company. I know it's not always easy because it's hard to get those job offers, especially with no experience. But what makes your career go the fastest in the games industry, like most entertainment industries, is if you're associated with successful products. So you do want to pay attention to who you're joining. You don't want to just take any job. But I told my son once famously, I said, well, you look at all the job offers you have and you take the best one. If there's only one, take it because it's better to be working than not. But it is important to work on games that with a company and with games that you respect because they kind of follow you around. Having worked on a great game, even if you had a relatively minor role, you're going to have a much easier time parlaying that into a better role in another company. So I would say look out for indie game developer kind of offers where it's like, yeah, we're going to be working on this thing for the next 5 years, and you just look at it and you go, wow, this has got almost no chance. Better off to be working on something that might be a big staff that has a chance of shipping because you want shipped titles behind you.
Sure.
There's nothing wrong with startups, but they're really, really hard and probably not the first thing you want to do. As a game developer, if I got some indie game developers out there, my strongest suggestion would be don't do real-time strategy games and don't do role-playing games. Those games are much bigger than you think they are. They're a lot harder to build than you think they are, and they take an army of people to do right. And of course, most people just want to go make the games they love, so they go right into that grinder, and it's quite painful.
Yeah, it's amount of content, and now the expectation for most of those is
high.
open world.
Yes.
And so
Really
you're basically taking on the GTA scale.
Yeah.
Like, ouch.
You can be really, really good, but 300 people are going to outperform you no matter what. I mean, it's just challenging. I see some indie games come out all the time that are wonderful expressions where you might even only have a couple people Jonathan Blow has done some wonderful games, mostly on his own. So there's definitely some people out there that can do truly AAA competitive products out there. But those are rare individuals, and they usually have a long litany of games behind them before they get to that point. So as a new person in the industry, take that perhaps less attractive role, but at least you're part of a team that's got a good chance of shipping a product, and you can see the actual product cycles, and just ship games, keep shipping games. That's how you get better.
Yeah, and Lou shared with me another stat that surprised me. He's been a part of over 150 shipped games,
Yeah.
which that number kind of boggles.
We used to do them once a month.
Yeah,
back in the day, and then I was part of teams that did multiples at a time. So it adds up.
You
after
can
a while.
add them up. It's true. I've
But yeah, it's nowadays it can take 4 or 5 years to do a single game, and so I'm very fortunate.
yeah,
to
it is, I guess, game size, because when I ran our first studio, and we were shipping games for the e-ink Kindles, they were simple word games. We were cranking out one a month. I don't think of that as like 14 games in 14 months, but it was.
It was, yeah.
So,
Like we did 9 Disney games in 6 months.
yeah.
Because we were doing these Disney kids game back in the day on the Apple II and the Commodore 64.
Right.
We used to do, and I'm not even counting like when we did these compilation games, like I would call World Games 1, but there were 6 games in World Games, right? I'm not even counting the 6, I'm just saying 1. Count that as 1.
So NVH Hitch, go ahead and put your question into the question queue, because we got a lot there, and then people can vote for them. We're happy to answer it. We'll get there. Let's pop to the next one here about, of course, we knew this question was likely coming. We even talked about it on the way over, which is, what are your opinions on cloud gaming, such as Stadia and the Xbox cloud gaming service, as in, how will this affect the future development of games due to standardization of cloud computing ability, or how gamers pay for and access games? So it's really the impact on building games, which I think is an interesting
It's an
topic.
interesting question, yeah. I think, so I believe that the subscription-based service, these are not necessarily tied together, but cloud gaming allows for instant access, which is why we called ourselves Instant Action when we were doing downloadable games. And the ability to just jump right in and try something right away is even less friction. So the more you can remove friction, the better when it comes to getting a larger number of people to try something.
Of course.
And so subscriptions work the same way, because you're paying a wrap fee. Just like Netflix, I might go watch something that I probably wouldn't have paid for. I wouldn't even have rented it, but why not? I've got it. I'll look at it. Same thing. Amazon Prime, obviously, same way. So I think it does change a portion of the market. I don't think it eliminates free-to-play downloadable, certainly not immediately, and it's probably never going to replace premium delivered in some way, but you may not see packaged goods forever. So I think it's a segment that will be there and will grow. There are fundamentally some latency issues around the sort of last mile. Even if you get it down to the last 100 yards, there's still some amount of that whole streaming environment now at 4K. So if you want to play a game at 4K and you want 144 hertz because you're being competitive, it's just not going to be streamable, not for a while.
Yeah.
And I think there's a speed of light problem here and a bandwidth issue that does come to play. So some games will probably never be actually really appropriate for it. But as designers, we are trained to design around. We used to design for 1200 baud, even 300 baud modems. So it's clearly you can design around it. So there'll be a large and growing segment of games that will be cloud-based, and it's one of the reasons I'm excited to be part of Amazon, because of this sort of DNA of understanding how cloud works and how actually elastic cloud, and that's a whole separate issue. So yeah, I think it is changing the way people make games. You stand your game up sooner, you play it right away. It's accessible to anybody. That changes some of your design constructs. The audience is broader, so you have a much wider range of potential ideas, and I think in a weird way it allows for much more specialization as well. So what we see in mobile games is you can have quite a successful mobile business that focuses on a very, very niche market, because there's just so many of them out there. You can actually be a large niche.
Sure. 1% of mobile users is still a huge
Still
game.
a huge number.
and you could make a living off a lot fewer.
So a lot more creativity when you have a lot more options like that.
Yeah. And I think some of the interesting debates, because piece of history, I've been a part of building game streaming at Amazon twice. This is public stuff where we built it 10 years ago as part of the Android App Store to stream Android apps. We built it again as a AWS service about 5 years ago, and just talking about things we have built. The Rex 243, who's here for every broadcast, actually, I'll comment as a side. He lives in Hamburg, Germany, so he's always up in the middle of the night to catch the stream, which I really appreciate. But 5G, first, one of the challenges with game streaming is people will try and use it anywhere. When we were streaming, we had people failing, and we went and checked, and they were trying to do it from GoGo Interflight. GoGo Wireless on their plane.
On the airplanes.
On the airplanes. They were trying to use it while they're sitting in an airplane seat. And so, that's one of the many... but Google Stadia will never be available everywhere, and everyone here in Greece, it will not come. So, I guess we have someone else, Poseidon, here from overseas as well. Yeah, I completely agree. One of the challenges is getting that ubiquity, at least early. Another thing is I've seen a lot of technology promise that they're going to eliminate latency. And so,
there's going to be there's some technologies. I know we're supposed to there's some technologies available by Amazon and others that allow you to connect customers that are closer together so you can make those connections faster. But security in games is getting more and more important for cheating and such. And so as long as you're using a server that's managing a process and it's talking to multiple people, it's gonna be that, sure, if you're all in a metropolitan area and you can get everybody together and you have enough players and you'll have a great experience.
No, look, game streaming is... We talk about this incessantly. Like, to be fair, again, as you can imagine, inside a gaming group, inside a cloud company, we talk about the potential and the problems of Stadia and potential services like that incessantly. And the one thing that probably will make one of them huge is where we figure out, is this not the guy that made Xbox? No, he's done many things. He did not make Xbox. So no Phil Spector, but it is Luke Castle, who co-founded Westwood Studios, made Command and Conquer and many other games, but not Xbox. Oh, all right, got it. So,
so somebody, I just saw something go by.
Yeah.
It'll become the standard, somebody had said, but I think streaming will start off as a pretty big category when all the kinks get worked out. It will grow, and I think it'll always be there, but I just find it really hard to believe that we'll get to a point where we have the throughput, not just the bandwidth, but the low latency ubiquitously across the planet. Maybe if somebody does like mesh network satellites, but even then they're too high up and it takes too long to go up and down. There's some problems about photons that get in the way of making it perfect for all games. So you'll still have people who want
which is really the thing. The thing I was going to say is, our internal discussion is, someone will figure out a game for which streaming makes possible a game that is otherwise not possible, or very inconvenient. And where it will really take off is where you have a cool game that can only be played streamably. And so an equivalent game, whether you love it or hate it, would be Pokemon Go, because they're just, before mobile, there was no real way to build a game that incorporated VR, AR that kind of way. And so there will be some location, that was location based. There will be something that makes streaming work that way.
Yeah.
So I think that's where it will turn over, because as this question supposes, and we're going on at length about it a little bit because we know people are interested, this question asks about paying. And look, bandwidth and compute cost money. So right now that money comes when you buy your PC or your console. That's how and then you buy the game. But the cloud costs money to run. And so there's going to have to be something that causes people to be willing to pay to use some sort of streaming service, because it's unlikely that they will be able to be completely free or completely ad supported.
Yeah,
because people play too many hours. They want really good bandwidth. They want really low latency, and all of those things add up to expensive. And so those are some of the problems. Now, It sounds like we're here basically poo-pooing these
Not
services.
at all. I'm not poo-pooing it. It absolutely is coming. It absolutely will be a category. It will start small. It will grow.
And the other thing
Absolutely,
I'd say is,
no question about it.
I don't know if you share this opinion. I want it.
Yeah.
Like I've built it twice.
Yeah, I want it.
And that was because I wanted it 10 years ago. Like the vision is not new. And it would be so much nicer. Just flip on your cheap laptop, your tablet, your whatever, play any game, no install time, no patch time, no wait time. I built that. There you go. So it's a really tough problem. We'll go ahead and jump to the next question. There's a bunch of questions in, 10 plus have been approved. Nobody's voting on them. So as I tell chat all the time, go vote, and you get to pick what we'll talk about.
Act like you're in Chicago.
Go vote. The graveyards are still voting.
Vote early and vote often.
Vote early, vote often.
The old joke.
The old joke about the political machine. Yes. Yes, you can. We can even have. Well, all right. Politics, you're tempting me because somewhere now there'll be a question: should we buy Greenland?
Right there, you go.
And if you can vote it up, we'll talk about it because we want to have fun.
This is an AMA.
That's right. Ask me anything. Should we buy Greenland? I have opinions on this, and I bet Lou does too. All right, the next question up is, what are special aspects of being in a leading position, I would assume this is in a video game company, compared to other industries?
Wow, that's interesting. So I've only worked in video games and casino gaming, so I can only compare those two industries. I've consulted in a few others. But my observation from the consulting work I've done, the video game executives are... oftentimes from the industry, from the craft within the industry. And most companies aren't quite built that way. Like sometimes you have the engineer that's running the organization, but that's not as typical. So I think that's a little bit different. And I also think that the video game industry, like any hits-driven industry, there's a lot of personal judgment that's involved. Even in the most senior leadership roles, there's a lot of judgment on little things that you wouldn't expect. What I love about the structured Amazon is the distribution of authority to, if it's working the way the leadership principles guide single-threaded leaders, people have a lot of authority at very lower levels where they can do a lot of things. And I think that's really powerful. I think it's part of the reasons the company's been so successful. It's one of the things I admire most about the company I'm at now. And video game industry is... there's both flavors of that, but I think that the leadership position, what's nice is you're still involved in creative decisions and you still get to exercise a lot of judgment.
Yeah, I would say something that we see at Amazon and we talk about a lot is you're in a leading position in a non-game company. Whereas at Westwood, you would have been in a leading position at a purely gaming company. And I think that's different.
IAC was different because it was a web services company.
Yep.
That's Match.com, Expedia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that company was, they didn't see video games the same way. It's just like Amazon doesn't quite see it that way. So it's a little bit of a misfit. But being an executive in the game business, when you have game team, again, I think that's that. There's an expectation that the executives play the games, understand the games, and know the games. And in fact, people get pretty much... they get pretty harassed if they don't actually try to be the customer of their own products. It's good advice for any business, but I'd say even more so in games.
Yeah, and that's definitely that's something that's different. I going way back, this is old, but when I was first working in video games at Amazon long ago, I did. We were a retail company, right? We shipped things in boxes, Amazon Prime. And I did have one of the SVPs above me. We were talking about selling virtual items, and I was talking about buying a Vorpal sword in a game, and he asked me, how would that ship? Like, if it's bought in-game, how would that ship to the customer? And it was one of those where at first I, double facepalm, and then you wonder, are you being trolled? And I was not. It was a legit question. So that's back in the day a little bit. Yeah, exactly. So all right, so we have some more good questions here. There's a tough one coming up. We'll switch to the next one, Dave, which is, are game leaks ever tactical or part of strategy?
Well, I've seen I guess the answer is yes. Clearly, that has happened, and people have been caught out on it. I think nowadays, though, that transparency with the customer base is rewarded, and lack of transparency or trying to be manipulative is punished. And so I think there's less of it than there used to be. But clearly, you're intentionally releasing information into the marketplace about games that are coming up if that's part of your strategy. I haven't seen a marketing strategy recently in recent memory that said, okay, what we're going to do is use a back channel to try to leak something. If you put it out there anymore, it gets out pretty quickly and it spreads like wildfire. So I don't think. I think it's absolutely a tactic or a strategy to release information in a very deliberate way, but I don't think that it's characterized as a leak.
Leak to me means you're denying it or no commenting it.
That's pretty serious, and generally that's frowned upon inside the company. You don't want to see stuff leak out around the edges.
Yeah, we have had folks not in our games group, but there have been cases where people have leaked things and they thought it was cool. They're getting press attention or whatever, but leaks is not normal. Hi, Icarus. Welcome in. I would say that's not... I agree. I don't think it's much a part of strategy. That said, when you talk about games, there's so many game companies, even big ones, right? We count 50 big game companies in the industry. Every possible strategy has been tried because it's hyper competitive. And anything that gets your game a little bit of a leg up matters. So
I would actually put one part, which I guess probably isn't obvious to people who haven't been in the industry. If you do a limited beta or limited alpha test and you're putting it out to a group of people that are not under inside your company, every time the group of people you put the game out to, it gets bigger, you usually have a PR strategy around what happens if the game gets leaked. Yeah. And so I'd say that where leaks become part of your tactics or your strategy is not because you intentionally did it, but because it does get out, and then you have a predetermined method about how you're going to deal with that. So that does happen quite a bit. And in fact, if you're smart and you're careful and you're watching, you'll have some idea of what you're going to say if. So I've seen many plans of here's what we're going to say if this gets out, and then we're very, very thankful it didn't get out, and so we don't have to execute that plan.
Yeah, on the stream before, I've talked about a variation of that where when Eisenhower authorized D-Day, the invasion of Normandy, he wrote a speech apologizing for the failure of the invasion and taking responsibility for the lack of success.
And
then he found it in his jacket pocket weeks later, when he put that coat back on. So glad
I didn't need that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that's a piece of history. So we talked about that. Yeah.
A lot of work goes into those things. It's like assets that don't end up in games. There's a lot of work that goes into making a product, any consumer product that people don't see, that just never makes it. Cutting room floor.
And
Disney, when I've worked with Disney on the Lion King and some of the other products, probably the most diligent, I would say, rigorous about making sure that the things that didn't make it into the product never see the light of day. They're very good about controlling that.
Yeah. So Pollock, or however you pronounce Polloqq, you're absolutely right. I was talking about a pre-mortem. It's something I recommend as a great business strategy. Icarus, Apex Legends was a very surprising example of leaks not getting out. Yeah, I would say Apex
great example.
Did a great job jumping out, really catching the industry relatively flat-footed, which is pretty rare. And I would say their Twitch launch strategy is considered textbook. In other words, now I think a lot of game companies would refer back to what Apex did and say, okay, at least for their moment in time, they nailed the zeitgeist of opportunity. So we'll keep rolling through questions because we've got a lot of good ones. Thank you, everybody, for putting questions in and voting on them. That's what we do here. So I see a bunch of people have come in. We're talking with Lou Castle, co-founder of Westwood Studios, as well as now working with me at Amazon. And
mention the games again: Command & Conquer, Lands of Lore, Blade Runner, Monopoly,
Lion
King, Lion King, not the current, but back when the first game came out. So lots of games over the years.
Do you have Disney tunes stuck in your head?
I know them all, or very many of the ones from Lion King anyways. I know some of them that never got shipped too, which is kind of one of those things. So yeah. So there was this duo between James Earl Jones and the guy did Zazu, who skips Rowan Atkins, and that duet, that was a disaster. So that was thankfully never thrust into the public eye.
Yeah, you talk about cutting room floor. I know somebody who worked on Frozen.
Yeah.
And the original cuts of Frozen, it was fire and ice twins. So like both sisters were magical. And yeah, so things that take lots of work and lots of development.
Heat miser and frost miser.
Yeah, exactly. End up on the cutting room floor. So, all right, cool.
I guess it's been done.
All right. So we'll go ahead and jump to this next question. You may have already put it up. What is the biggest challenge facing the game industry in the next decade? Now, answer carefully and only to me, because I have some stock investments I need to go make, as long as you're right. Otherwise, share it with them.
It's always, a decade in the games industry is, it's like predicting the weather, right? I could give you some percentage chance and then say it was within or without of the percentage. It's very difficult to predict. I think the challenges we see right in front of us, which will echo throughout the next decade, is, how do we make a transition from the current and what's already in progress, the current distribution methodologies to new distribution methods, and how do we satisfy the large number of gamers? Gaming is still growing at a massive compounded annual growth rate, and we're going to have twice as many. I think the estimate is twice as many gamers from Newzoo in the next 5 years. We're talking billions of gamers. So it's a crazy number of people. So the biggest challenge is just how does the industry deal with all of that supply of customers, and well as a massive amount of diversity and the change in the way that we actually deliver products to our customers as well as what they're expecting. I think probably from a game maker's point of view, one of the things that's most challenging to me is I'm impatient and I imagine what the game is I want to make and I want to see it happen as quickly as possible. But the detail, the amount of features, the amount of quality, just the sheer volume of what goes into even what people would say is a simple mobile game. They're just all massive undertakings. And so it feels like everything that's going to be a hit just took so much effort from so many people. How are we ever going to keep up? And I think the movie industry is dealing with that to some extent. If you ever watch the credits at the end of movies, it's just staggering the number of people that go in, the amount of effort that goes into these things. So the prize is great. The prize is getting bigger all the time. But because that effort is so much bigger, the contribution a single person can make to that thing becomes diluted. And I think that's a challenge as well. So there's lots of challenges. Every few years, something surprising happens in the game industry. And, might be the Wii controller, but suddenly there's a whole different group of customers. Something like that, even Switch to some extent really changed the way people Fortnite with multi platform crossplay, things like that. Just we know they're coming, we see them coming, but when they come, they tend to explode, and man, it changes everything overnight. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. But I don't think there's like one distinct problem. It's just a litany of new challenges that are thrown at us every day, and I'm not getting any younger, but I'm trying to keep up.
So I think there's some that you touched on. I'll emphasize, and then we'll wade into controversy here, though, just to keep things interesting.
Sure.
So yeah, statistically, you look at like India, and half a billion people in India aren't yet online. Half a billion got online very recently. Yeah. You could expect, for example, India could theoretically be a gaming market like China for scale 5 years from now. Yes, that is, it may not be, but could happen. Yep. And that kind of growth, mind-blowing. And I've also heard or seen, some stuff about mobile games being played competitively now, where there's these techniques in China where people are playing with 6 fingers on a mobile mm-hmm. phone, and like the dexterity to do that just could change gaming in another way to play that way. But to wade into some controversy for a minute, or potential controversy, games are clearly becoming more mainstream and more aware now. In the eyes of the world, gaming continues to grow in importance and relevance. Yeah. And so it's gone from a niche hobby, which wasn't ever that niche, but perceived that way, right? Teenage boys in the basement is still the image.
Yeah.
And has become more mainstream. We were joking upstairs, by the way, how we talk to customers, gamers. We would call them gamers, but you talk to somebody who says they're not a gamer, and then you ask them if they play on their mobile phone, and they do, and then you ask them, well, what do you play? And they immediately list 5 games, and you say, well, how often do you play? And they're like, well, when, I wake up in the morning, I check into the game, and then maybe on my lunch break, and then maybe at night. But they're not gamers, according to them.
I spend a couple $100 a week, but it's not really. I'm not really a gamer. It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah,
yes, you
spend
are.
all this money.
You're exactly what we want.
You're exactly, yeah. But I think, therefore, it's recently rearisen. Some politicians were criticizing, shooter games are causing all these problems.
Causing violence.
Causing violence.
I think wars create video games, not the other way around, based on the evidence of the number of video games based on wars. It turns out we didn't need video games to have 2 world wars. So not so sure that video games cause violence.
But going further, I guess, what do you see for the game industry kind of across the political spectrum? Because another thing that comes up in video games is appearance of characters and representation of characters, both how they appear and diversity of the characters. And so
There's a whole bunch of questions there.
Yeah, well, the meta question I want to ask is actually, how much of a problem do you think being scrutinized is, whether it's for violence or diversity or representation? Because I'm guessing back when you first began, these questions were fewer.
It's always been around. I mean, back in the early 90s, all the publishers and all the major developers were constantly worried about the fact that because our industry didn't have as strong of a lobbying group, and because we didn't have the kind of attorney base to protect us, we were constantly the kind of whipping boys of, somebody did something violent. So they walk right by all the books, all the movies and everything else. Like, look, they played a video game. It must be the game. And we just didn't have much defense of that. There's been many academic studies now that show that the actual outlet of doing that, just like many other things, actually might even deter violence instead of creating it. But it doesn't make people feel easier as a parent if they see their younger children playing something that looks very violent. They immediately think, that must be what's creating this. So there's plenty of studies out there. I don't need to get in the academia of it, but thankfully it's being done. And I think it's pretty well protected. It won't protect us from politicians wanting to make points because they work at a visceral level. And God knows, in lots of places, people will say inflammatory things just to about galvanize a base. So I don't think that we're going to be protected against that. That's going to be something we have to keep fighting. But you said something else I think is really important. I think it is incumbent upon us as game makers to recognize that our audience and our customers, and this is, customer obsession, of course, just an Amazon thing, but I think it's been an obsession from way back when I started Westwood. It's important that we recognize our audience is changing. I think it's important that we make characters that people can identify with. And so when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think those are really big initiatives that are extremely important. I think trying to find ways to deal with toxicity in the environment's extremely important. Those are not things that I would shy away from as designers. It's very hard, but ultimately we do have some responsibility to try to deal with those problems. It's just not it's not right. Forget about being cool or fun. It's just not right for people to feel alienated when they try to go to interact with your entertainment.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. We're not. I think that is an increasing challenge. Maybe it's multifaceted, but I think as games are more immersive and more, as we're trying to broaden the appeal of games, it's also more of an issue.
Well, the audience already changed, right? So this is one of the things we were talking about mobile games. Actually, way back when I was at Zynga, it was a majority. I can't give the exact numbers, but better than 50%. That's the majority of our audience was women. And when I would talk to some of the whales, because we did actually have personal relationships with some of the people that were really big into the games, and chat with them online and stuff, and even talk to them on the phone, and they'd say, well, I'm not, it's being ruined by these gamers. And I'm like, you're playing 40 hours a week. I mean, it's a full-time job, and don't consider themselves a gamer.
Ruined by these gamers.
But they were,
that's priceless.
But they're the audience, and it's like knowing who they are and knowing what they're getting out of it is really important. And giving them characters they can identify with, giving them characters that they're comfortable with is a very big deal. And one of the games we're working on right now, Crucible's been announced, so I can talk about it, but our character designs are very informed by making sure that we have all sorts of different types of characters, not just from the gameplay point of view, but also so that we can have lots of our customer base is diverse. We want to make sure they can actually identify with our characters.
Okay. And Poseidon, I love your comment. Why haven't you become a pro footballer since you've been playing FIFA since '98? Yes, I wish. I wish somebody was asking me on last
Exactly.
night's stream what type of character I would play in WoW Classic, and we got into talking about D&D characters. Yeah, if all the time I had playing D&D had made me able to fly, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's jump to the next question here.
There's a great TED talk about that where a guy talked about the fact that Michael was his name. I can't think of his last name, but he talked about the fact that his reality is the games he plays. And people say, well, he spent more time driving a simulator
Ferrari
car than he's ever spent driving a real
a car.
And he got into this whole kind of weird thought process of, well, these are my social groups. These are I see them, I hear them, I talk to them. That is my social. I'm not antisocial. I'm just online social. Yeah. So it's very interesting. So fun stuff. Sorry, just off in the weeds. I can do that easy.
No. That's actually it's a good point in that for even here in chat, I only stream once a week. Unlike Shadowfox, who streams 7 hours, I usually stream once a week for an hour to 90 minutes. And yet I've gotten to know a number of the regulars. They share where they're from. So you get the community that deep, and these are people that I'll struggle to ever meet, right? I mean, maybe I will. I haven't yet been to Hamburg, and I'd like to. I have someone who's in chat sometimes. I haven't seen him here yet tonight, who's in Singapore. These are interesting places, but super hard. Anyway, how did you get... we talked about a little of this next question, but I thought the interesting part was the question. I'll read the whole question. How did you get to where you are? Did you go from school directly into founding Westwood? I guess a shorter version is, what has been your career path? You talked about your career path. Yeah, I brought the shirt out tonight, Chalupa Whale. That's right. So the shirt now lives here at the studio, at Awesome Dave's studio. And so, so the shirt became the icon, but it lives here full time. It's almost Dave's property at this point, as he's claiming with his emote stream there. But the interesting part of this question, I think, I'm curious about is it did sound like you went straight to Westwood from school, but I don't think that's what you meant. So
It's something like that. So when I was in high school is when I started making games that I would send into magazines. It's kind of hard for people to imagine. There was no distribution channel for games, and so if you wanted to make a game, you would actually type in your code and send it in, mail it to a magazine, and they would publish it, and then people would type in the lines of code and then run the game. So when I started making games, that's how I started making games. That was while I was going to high school, and then I graduated in '83 from high school, got into college, was going to go to architecture, and discovered that I really like computers a lot. Asked my dad a question. It's kind of a funny story some other time, but if you vote it up, I'll give you the story. But ultimately, I ended up going to Fine Arts and Computer Science at the University of Las Vegas and started Westwood. Second company I started, I worked at a computer store, an Apple computer store, and we started the first one called Out of the Blue. I wasn't a principal in that one. I was just one of the kind of group of people. I wasn't driving it. And then Brett came to me, one of our customers, and got to be a friend and said, hey, let's make some games together. We made 2 games together or 3 games together before Westwood. And then we decided, hey, you know what? We're doing all the work. Why don't we just start our own company? And so that's how Westwood got started. I was still going to school, still going to college. In fact, I went 5 years to university. So extended another 3 years of Westwood's beginnings. I think I had 7 employees while I was still attending full-time college. And I still had a consulting business because Brett and I took very little money out of the business. We paid our employees best we could, but ourselves, we were always very conservative. Wanted to make sure we had payroll, never want to miss a payroll. And then, so I had still sold computers on the weekend. So I basically had a computer job part-time, a part-time consulting job, going to school full-time, and was starting Westwood all at the same time, which is how I got stacked all these experiences since kind of crazy when you add them all up. But that's how I
Have
got
you
into
considered
business.
that maybe I should just turn the easy coach over to you, and it could be the Lou coach?
It was pretty nuts. But they all sort of like they blended from when I just wouldn't let go of the last thing. It took a lot to let go, and ultimately just couldn't keep going to school because at some point, you just you have too many people working for you, and too many people depending on you. Had to kind of start cutting things off.
So I'm curious. We'll go to the next question here in a second, but I'm curious how much of that holding on to all those things. One of the things I've talked about on the stream recently for people is the danger of fear. Fear holding you back. So how much were you holding on to the different jobs because you were afraid that something else wasn't going to succeed, or was that nothing to do with it?
I think as an entrepreneur, I've always said it's as an entrepreneur, you got two sort of states: paranoid or dead. If you're going to be successful, right, you've got to be afraid all the time. So there's a certain amount that, like, okay, why do we call ourselves Westwood Associates, right? Which was our original name. It was because I had a consulting business and was making pretty good money, and we wanted a name that was flexible enough to where if the game thing didn't work out, at least we could make some money on it. We wouldn't have to stop doing programming and such. So that's always the plan B. I would always have like a plan B, C, D, E, F, all the way down the line. And part of it's just because I like it all. I like doing these things, and so I just didn't want to. I actually really enjoyed sales. I didn't think I would because I was a little bit introverted. Hard to believe now, but when I was younger, and sales really opened me up, and I felt it was fun to be able to talk to people about something I was passionate about. So I like doing that on the weekends. I love the store that I worked with. I love the people. Nick Reese and Penny Reese, they were really good to me, and I don't think there would have been a Westwood without them. David Gardner, who was one of the founders of EA Europe, was also one of the salesmen in the computer store. He went to the same high school as me, a year after me. So
Small world.
it's a very small world.
So I want
Anyways,
to acknowledge Quentin Talentimo here. He's been kind of hitting up chat with all the things he's loved from Westwood with Red Alert, etc. So we see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you. I mean, that's people always thank me for thanks for making that game. I'm like, no, thank you for playing them and buying them, because if you didn't, I couldn't make them. So.
So let's see. Next question. What are your thoughts on the development of the RTS genre in the last 15 years, and what might the future hold for that genre?
Yeah, I think RTS is sort of a ripe genre for a new breath of fresh air. I've been around in this industry long enough to have heard people multiple times say, "Oh, fantasy games are dead," and then they're not. Shooters are dead, and then they're not. Role-playing games are dead, and so that time and time again, there's people have predicted the death of a genre. RTS games in particular kind of got to a point where they got really complicated. And they kept doing the devolving pyramid to where there were fewer and fewer and fewer people that could enjoy the experience. And that's actually what kind of begot the home MOBA scene, which is like a much less, and it literally was a mod of an RTS. It was like a much more focused on the hero. So I think, though, that idea of, it was really Brett and Joe Bostic and a bunch of folks that got together, not my idea, but they came up with that idea of, well, what if I'm trying to do this meta thing at the same time I'm doing this micro thing, and it's all these things all over the map. I think that's a kind of classic, wonderful compromise that somebody has to do, and I think that it's ripe for new expressions. People keep saying can't wait somebody just make a game like Command and Conquer again, and you think you want that, but go back and play those games, even the original StarCraft, so I won't pick on our own products, but any one of the games, Age of Empires, they're all great games. You go back and play the very first one, and they're charming, but you don't feel the same way now that you did then. And what you really mean to say is, I want to feel the same way I did when I first booted up that, stuck in my CD-ROM and saw the installation process. Probably you don't want an installation process, but the installation process for Command & Conquer was an entertainment in itself. And that was a moment where you were just like surprised and delighted. That's what people want. And I haven't seen it yet in the RTS genre recently, but I think it's going to happen. And so I'm pretty excited about the future for that genre.
Yeah, another game designer I've talked with a bunch, the founder of Reflexive Entertainment, which we acquired. He said, look, people declare all kinds of games dead and gone, and none of them ever are, including platforms, right? They may shrink, they may go to the side, but I just had someone from Twitch telling me a couple days ago how much fun they had they found an old Nintendo. They were on the road and they found an old Nintendo in a secondhand store, bought it for $100, and they and their friends that had all these plans, I think, to run around Chicago, just ended up in their hotel room playing.
It's a lot of fun. It's nostalgic.
Yeah, nostalgic.
And some of those things, I mean, some of the games are perfect expressions of the game, and they're just fun. I mean, you don't have to. Yeah. They are still fun today as they were then. It's like some films, you go back and you watch films like Blade Runner, my favorite film. You go back and watch it today, and it holds up. I mean, to this day, it still holds up. Ridley Scott's a genius director, great cinematography. And that's amazing, right? That's, if you think about a prediction of the future still holding true decades later, it's an incredible thing to do. And some games are like that, where it's still a great game, it's still a lot of fun. Most of them don't age so well.
Well, actually, I think we're seeing this right now. Chat with Chalupa Whale nailed this. So yesterday on Twitch, WoW Classic was by far the most watched game. But if your theory's right,
it's hard.
People are saying they want WoW. But people are saying they want WoW Classic, but they actually, in a sense, want to feel like they did when they first played WoW. And it's not clear that having the game back will get you that experience back. It might.
I think if you had it the first time, playing the game again gives that nostalgia and gives you that same feeling, because
for a little bit,
it's an echo, right? It's an echo from the past. It's an echo. But if you were just to start the game, like if somebody made a game like WoW, but it wasn't WoW, you're not going to give it much credit, right? Because you would say, "Oh, I've played that game before." So you don't want that game again. You don't want the games industry to keep making the same games. You want them to make games that make you feel the same way you did when you played that game the first time.
That's an that might be the insight of the night. I like the quote from Hephaestus here. I want to feel like a 12-year-old with no obligations and 10 hours a day to play. Yes,
sure.
I totally want that. And there's some other people commenting on it, Luthon, etc. And now we're getting a lot, so we'll let that stuff scroll up. All right, next question here. What are your thoughts on the increase in loot boxes and other exploitative systems to maximize revenue from so-called whales?
Awesome.
Yeah, good and controversial. A very small amount of the player base that makes up for most of the revenue in AAA games.
Yeah.
So you've obviously characterized those as exploitative. You're not alone in that, but not everybody would agree.
Yeah.
This is a good point for both of us, for me to repeat that we're not here speaking for either Amazon or Twitch, because being clear, there are, in certain cases, lawyers have gotten involved with what is and isn't okay in loot boxes. And so we're not going to get into that part, but we can give an opinion on that mechanic.
Yeah.
And then we can talk about driving revenue too. So.
Well, we started the broader, because I think it's kind of the end of the question. I personally love the fact that there are people who are capable and willing to pay a lot of money to play games that funds the fact that I might play it for free. So as a mostly free-to-play player, I am a whale on a couple of games, but most games I don't pay for. And I'm really happy that there's somebody else who loves that game enough to forego a lot of money, so I don't have to, because I get to enjoy a lot more games for a lot less money than doing that. My son is a perfect example. He never pays for any games. It's almost impossible to get him to pay any money at all. And that wouldn't be possible if somebody wasn't paying the bill. I am not a fan of anything that's truly exploitative. There's good examples because I also worked in the gambling industry. There's a lot of things. People always assume that the gambling industry does things that are nefarious. It's actually quite the opposite. There's a lot of regulation around it. There's a lot of protections, consumer protections around it. So a good example of that would be the near miss reels. Somebody came up with a great idea of a slot machine giving you a near miss. When
two bars and
really
a
close,
cherry,
so that you would get a kind of misinform you as to the actual predictability. Those are flat out illegal, and they were justly and appropriately punished for that. I don't think there's something inherently wrong with gotcha mechanics, which is that's not gotcha like I gotcha, but it's actually gotcha. It's actually the category.
Japanese word.
Yeah, it's the loot boxes. But there's nothing inherently wrong with those mechanics. They can be used in a way that is fundamentally abusive. But I don't think that you want to eliminate the mechanic. If we get rid of the mechanics altogether, I guess that's fine. It's not the end of the world. We'll find other ways to have maybe a little bit more clear. I'm a big fan of the transparency in those. I think it's important to tell people what the odds are. And somebody says, well, if they told us the odds, we wouldn't do them. I'm like, lotteries tend to argue with you on that. People tell you about the odds on lotteries
And the odds
all the
are
time.
very well published.
And very well published, and people still play them because I think just in general, gambling in general is a tax for people who are bad at math. And so I think loot boxes and other things come in the same category. I don't think they're inherently bad, though. I think this goes back to people vilifying something that is, there's not, I mean, when I looked at the outside looking into Zynga before I worked there, people were all about they just bait and switch people, they trap them and they steal their money. That is not the case at all. The company was very careful about its customer base. They wanted to make sure people were very happy. And it was really neat to see. I mean, I personally, when I was running Mafia Wars, had opened up my personal communication lines with a bunch of the folks that support us financially because I wanted to make sure we were making the game they wanted. So I'm glad there are people who can do that. I can't say how much money they paid, but a lot. Much more than I thought was reasonable, but they were happy to do it and they were capable of doing it and nobody was getting hurt.
Yeah.
In the gaming industry, there's definitely things against problem gambling and stuff like that. I'm hoping that our industry is a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more progressive and doesn't require regulation. We do it because it is the right thing to do and we want to keep our customers happy.
Well, tying back to our earlier question, I think that really goes to the thing I was asking about in a way about challenges. When I said let's go into controversy, the challenges of the gaming industry, it is getting more scrutiny. Yeah. Maybe the scrutiny's always been there, but I'm more aware of it at least. I do think, to be really clear with chat, it's super hard. There's comments in chat about loot boxes getting banned everywhere. That's, again, playing whack-a-mole or squeezing a balloon. If you think that regulators or lawmakers are going to be more creative than the army of game makers in terms of ways to offer you the chance to buy something,
I think that's the right thing. So when I talk to designers about it all the time, people go, well, you've done this free to play stuff and you must know how to extract money from people. I'm like, first of all, you're starting from the wrong place. What you want to do is give players an opportunity for them to invest in the time and energy they're spending in the game. And usually it's to save them some amount of effort that they would otherwise have to put in. Pincus used to call them pinch points, or I think something like that, but pinches. But it's not, you don't squeeze the hell out of them. You don't want to turn somebody off. You don't want to rage quit. And when companies go too far, they get people to rage quit and they get it in mass.
And they get blowback.
And they get blowback and it can destroy it. So I think it has to be done responsibly. But I'm all for the idea, the fundamental idea of some people paying much more than others so that others can play for free, because I'm about reaching as many customers as I can. I want as many people playing the games as I can. And so to me, it's like, let's solve that problem and give the people with the money and the time that want to spend those things. It's the same as saying, well, I can't believe this game demands that you play 20 hours a day. It's like, well, no game demands that. I mean, they may make
turned it on.
They may have made that. Nobody came to your house and held you in front of it. So they may have made it so that that's the most efficient way to win, or check in 5 times a day or whatever. And those are all choices the designers make. I don't think they're inherently evil. They can be, but like everything else,
well, this is also to be
vote
clear.
with your dollars, vote with your feet. Don't play them.
This is exactly how Twitch works. So most of you know I ran Twitch Commerce. I helped build bits and subs, as well as I run Twitch Prime and therefore the free Prime sub. And Twitch has free-to-play mechanics. In other words, if you look at how a free-to-play game monetizes, and you were to look internally at how Twitch supports streamers, how you, the audience, choose to support the base of streamers, it looks very similar. A relatively small percentage of all Twitch viewers ever spend anything. And then within those people who spend some, you will have people who spend more and those who spend a lot more. Mm-hmm. And stories abound of streamers who've gotten enormous donations, as well as, and I know that data is accurate, streamers getting donations of $10,000 or more. The same with community gifting. We have a couple people here. Ironically, one of our big gifters in this channel is Chalupa Whale. So appropriately named. But the point is, Twitch is also free to play. Now, there's no loot box on Twitch right now. But going back to this point, the funniest thing, the observation I've heard is free to play games are really interesting. They're actually making all the free players, if you want to really like boil it down in a negative way, all the free players are getting free play for the entertainment of the whales. So you can think of it as actually the whales. The whales are paying for your entertainment. And
It's also not probably obvious to people who have not been in the industry, and it's not even obvious to people in the industry sometimes. It's much better to have somebody who will play your game regularly and make smaller contributions than it is to have somebody that comes in and just drops thousands of dollars right at once and races right through the content. So you'll notice if you pay attention and you deconstruct a lot of games, you'll notice the most successful games actually have throttles that keep people from spending too much money. If you try to spend money, it gets very, very inefficient very quickly, and you can't spend it all at once. And that's very intentional. It's intentional because not because they don't want the money, but because they want to keep the customer. And so a lot of people don't, that's kind of counterintuitive, but believe it or not, being able to invest in and spend into a game in a way that keeps you with the pack is really important, especially in competitive games. And in some cases, you don't want to change, you don't want to have any kind of pay for power whatsoever because it's a highly competitive environment. And so you want to make sure the competition is of all players is equal. And so you just do cosmetics. Mm-hmm. So, what's wrong with putting cosmetics in a loot box? What difference does it make? Your character still plays exactly the same. So you have the special skin and somebody else doesn't. Really? That's not that big of a deal. And if somebody's willing to spend hundreds of dollars against that and they can afford it, why do you care? I mean, you get to play the game for free.
Chad immediately caught when I said there's no loot box on Twitch right now. The truth is we looked at it a couple years ago. So it's not that I'm like hinting about the future. It's actually the past. And the reason we looked at it, it'll be very transparent, is what we found is every time we offer a new way for fans to support streamers, they pick it up. And so we decided that wasn't a good way, but when we open more doors like Twitch Prime and other things for people to support streamers, they do. And it's generally additive. Anyway, we've beaten this question to death, and another one's got a ton of votes. So let's roll to that. And that one is, how does esports fit in today's game development? And this is a great question. So take it away.
Yeah. So esports are an interesting category because there's actually tiers of esports. There's games that are principally played as a sport, very few of those. Then a group of them that are played pretty actively as sports, and then kind of a larger one that's games you play other ways and also have some sports elements to them. So esports is a huge category. It's going to continue to be a huge thing. But what's really important about esports is, as a game maker, the only choice you have is to make choices that make your game unsuitable to be an esport. So basically, you can screw it up, and intentionally or unintentionally, but you can't force a game to be an esport. Ultimately, it's the customers, it's the consumers, it's the communities that decide whether or not they're going to willing to buy into your game as a fair and fun thing to do as a sport. And so most game companies that come out and say, well, we're going to do this game and it's going to be an esport and here's all our projections, I immediately discount all of that and say, no, maybe not. You can maybe aim to be capable of being the third tier down, but to be a top esport game, you can't engineer that. You can't make it happen. It's something that has to happen out of your community. And it's the streamers, it's the players themselves that you guys, the customers, get to anoint which ones are sports and which ones aren't. So for the game we're making, no secret about it, we're making a game that we've done everything we can to make it capable of being a competitive game, but we have none of our plans depend on the fact that it gets picked up as an esport. We certainly hope it does. But we could certainly screw it up. And I think actually some of the games that people they really push really hard trying to turn them into sports. Just because you can turn an activity into a tournament doesn't mean it's well suited to be a sport.
I agree. I actually take this question, maybe it was meant literally. The thing I think about a lot is, how does watchability fit in today's game development, or streamability? And that's a somewhat different take on it. Different take. And I think that's maybe not every game now thinks through, how is this going to perform on Twitch and other platforms like Twitch? But I think I would guess a lot of game makers are factoring in how will this stream.
Yeah, I think what I've seen prior to coming to Amazon as a contractor and consulting, I've seen a lot of game teams. It's a classic kind of catch. We're a premium game team. We've only ever made a game that sells and then goes on the shelves. So we're going to make the same game we've always made, but it's going to be free to play. And they haven't thought through how that impacts the game design, so they don't do very well. It's the same thing with watchability. You can't just make the game you were always going to make and say, but it'll be watchable because magic fairy dust. You have to actually design. You have to design your game to be watchable. And it can be a great game. There's some games out there. I love Overwatch League. It's a fantastic game. The league is fun, but it's a very hard game to watch. It's not as watchable as something like Fortnite. It's not surprising that it's hard to turn into a watchable experience. I don't think that's exactly the same as esports, because I think esports are about, when I think about esports, I think about the actual sporting aspect of the competitive nature of it. But sports do have to be watchable. So I think that's a subset of one of the things you can't screw up if you want an esport is it has to be watchable.
It has to be watchable.
Yeah, just one of the components that it has to be watchable. It has to be fair. It has to reward skill. It has to reward even the most smallest bit of iota of extra skill. I use golf a lot as an example.
And chat brought this up actually while we were talking about it, is you can't have any cap on skill. Like skill you have to be able to win at some level. Skill has to win.
Too much randomness, and it's one of the problems. People always say, well, how come a battle royale game hasn't become an esport? I'm like, well, as long as the game you're calling battle royale is, I run up to a box, I open it, and maybe there's a machine gun in it, that's not going to work as a sport. Can you imagine? And we go up to the golf tee and we go, okay, well, pick a number from 1 to 9 and we'll randomly pick a club for you. Here you go. It's like it's going to be too hard, even if you're a skilled player, it's just going to be too hard to distinguish that final level of skill.
And that's also why things like Hearthstone have to be a series of matches, because sometimes the cards just come up in a different order. All right.
And by the way, poker is a skill over time. Poker tournaments are a skill. A single hand of poker might be all luck.
Correct.
But over time, the poker tournament is a skill. Yeah.
All right. The next two questions are really good, so let's hear them. The next one is, what was one of your favorite games to work on when you were at Westwood?
Wow. I get that one a lot, and my answer is unfortunately always the same. I really loved working on Dragon Strike. It's not one of our biggest hits, but it was good. It did well. And the reason I loved it is because it was the last time as a creator that I was the designer, I was the lead engineer, and I did some of the art. I didn't do all of the art by any means, but I did most of the in-game art. And so it was the last personal expression of a game that I made. For better or for worse, I wrote the storylines and it became part of the D&D canon for the War of the Lance. And it was super fun to have that level of expression all in my own personal side. So it was kind of a selfish, maybe even somewhat narcissistic point of view, but that was a lot of fun to work on. And that's, when people say which one was my favorite game to work on, I love the challenge of it. There were all sorts of technical challenges that were hard to do back then. So that was great. There were individual things that I find are kind of heroic moments at Westwood that I was really happy with. But as far as the game itself, that one and Blade Runner are the two favorites for different reasons. Blade Runner, I was the technical director, the art director, and the executive producer. David Leary was the lead designer, and we worked closely together. So that was the last game where the game was my technical and creative idea. So that's why Blade Runner is really important. But Dragon Strike was the last game where it was like, that was the game I made. I made that, like sort of that I made this. Right?
Yeah, well, that's a big Twitch meme. So
yeah,
and for anybody out there who wants to make Awesome Dave, our producer, feel good, so when he built our question widget, he built in the ability for people to add to votes using bits. So if you want to just slam down on a question, he's like desperate for somebody actually besides himself to do this. You never have to.
No.
But anyway, that's a fun part of our tools, which is if you ever want to play Whale and monopolize questions, I guess you can take away the democracy. No one ever does, so it'll be a new experience if it ever happens. Next question is, what industry problem keeps you up at night?
I guess it's the constant crunching of the profitability. The costs of building the entertainment I like to build keep going up dramatically. Thankfully, the audiences are getting bigger, but the competition is getting larger. And so it's what keeps me up at night is there a point, is there a breaking point where only only the companies with the absolute deepest pockets can afford to make a product that has a ghost of a chance of being successful. I don't want to see the industry get to that point. Unfortunately, it's already pretty heavily in that direction. So what keeps me up at night is at one point, like right now, I think this last year there was only one game in the top 10 that wasn't a sequel. These keep me up at night because as much as I love the classic games and I want to play the next COD as much as anybody else, I don't want to only play that game. And so it's important that there's some way for other people to be successful. I'm glad to see some of the recent trends with margins for what the platforms are charging going down. Some of the things they've done recently is good because it gives the ability for more games to be profitable. I'm worried about subscriptions. I think the downside to subscriptions are it's a race to the bottom for the developer. And it's going to be very, very difficult to make money as a developer. In the beginning, it'll be great because there won't be much content and they'll get a big piece of it. But when we're all fighting over the same number of hours and we're only getting paid on hours played, it's going to be extraordinarily hard to be profitable.
So I actually agree with this. Just sitting inside and watching Lou and the other game makers at Amazon and the competition in the industry, the price to make a great game now keeps going up. Mm-hmm. The prize for having the biggest game also keeps going up.
Yes.
So I think that is a little bit, it's becoming a little more this kind of lottery. Years ago, I talked to one of the Xbox guys, Jay Allard, and this is 6 or 8 years ago when they were coming out with the Kinect. Xbox and Microsoft had done this analysis where they believed, at least at that time, that the game industry, viewed as an entire whole, had lost money. That like, if you took all the money that's ever been spent on games, then all the venture capital or whatever.
No, I used to be a VC. I was hired by VCs to go out and analyze things, and I'd say, well, the first thing I'm going to tell you right now is if you think there's any segment, section, anything of the industry, any slice you're going to do where the average is going to be a success, you're wrong. The average is failure. That is the average. And so it's a hit-driven business. There's a lot of...
But even if you take all the winning hits, they don't add up. No, they don't offset all the losers.
Not even close. I mean, it's not even close. It's at least a multiple and probably an order of magnitude. It's that bad. It's a terrible industry from a global point of view. But part of that is because of I think there was a long period of time, and it kind of comes in waves, where people see these huge returns and they think, well, I've got an idea for a game. I know this is what I've always done in my life. That'll make a good game. And they've got enough money to throw it at it. Because I see a lot of stupid money going to the games industry, and they invest in things that are just terrible ideas. So I don't think that it's
really bad games.
Yeah, I just don't think it's like, well, they're bad ideas. Like, just don't do that. That's a terrible idea for a game, right? And you'd see things like, well, this property or this movie was really great. It was a great rom-com. It's like really hard to make a game over a rom-com.
Yeah.
And
My Big Fat Greek Wedding as really a video game sounds
maybe
difficult.
Somebody's got a genius idea, but boy, most of those are going to fail. And so when you see these companies, they come and they say, well, these guys, they have this idea. It's like, well, does your team have a big history? Have they made a lot of hits? Have you been innovative? And I guess that's actually my thing. The thing that keeps me up at night, if I was going to put it in a sentence, would be that the cost of doing business in the industry and the need to mitigate risk drives creativity out of the industry. That's what keeps me up at night.
Well, we see the same thing, and that sucks because we see the same thing. The only movies that predictably make money are sequels, and that's why
massive investments.
Yeah,
James Cameron probably will make money on his next movie with the same crew, with the same actors, with the same director, and the same cinematographer when he spends $1 billion because he won't
because $1 billion.
He'll be able to do that, right?
Right.
Now there'll be somebody else who'll spend $500 million or $400 million, and it will be a terrible idea and it'll tank because it's got a terrible screenplay, right? That'll happen too, right. And that's actually what's happening in the industry. It's getting to be a ridiculously expensive place to gamble. And so there's less and less risks taken, and therefore less creativity, which is getting to be pretty sad.
Oh, hey. So Ligerbox is the gentleman who, yeah, he's a physician in Singapore. So
cool.
we're very
love
much
Singapore.
we're gonna delete the chat here. No, just kidding. But we hope to God none of your patients die as a result of this stream either. So please run down the hall and hit him with the paddles. All right. So next question voted up, I think, by Hephaestus, because I see he has some bits spent. What resources did you leverage to learn how to run your first company? Mentors, books, training, etc.
You know, I wish there was some silver bullet for that. I certainly read a lot of books in the early days on when the company started to grow. Brett came and said, "Hey, I really want to build a company. I want to have a lot of people." And I said, I just really want to have fun. And I just really want to kind of make games and have fun. I was not the guy who wanted to be but as the company started to grow, it's like, oh, wow, I guess I better pay attention and better be good at managing people, or at least helping people with their careers. And I think instinctively, I just treated people the way I wanted to be treated. The reason I started a company is because I didn't like working for people who treated me poorly. And so I just said, you know what, how would I want to be treated? How would I want to be received? And over my life, I've worked in a lot of volunteer organizations. And so I've always believed that people I'm working with in games are volunteers. They can probably get more money, sometimes even a more exciting job somewhere else. I'm just hanging on to them through their good graces. So I have to treat them better than other people if I want to keep them. And so if I had to boil it down to one thing, that's what made me feel that it was successful. It was leadership as a service. I didn't know how to express it back then. I think I can do that better now. And it was being a little bit on the selfless side, thinking of it as boy, wasn't it a privilege to work in something that I love to do every day, and to work with such incredibly talented people, and what can I do to help them be more successful and help them be better at what they do, and just keep them around because I think they're awesome. And so that level of commitment is what worked. I didn't have like a mentor, nor did Brett. We didn't have much in the way of business acumen, to be honest. We thought we did, but it came over time. And I think treat people right, care about your customer, were the kind of the biggest things that kept us being successful. And also to take a lot of risk on our own shoulders. We were paying people over double what we were making because we wanted to make sure we had the war chest to survive some time if we didn't have the next deal, and not to strip all the resources out of the company. We also made the conscious decision with Westwood. It was a very conscious decision not to call it, Castle Software or Sperry Software. And there's some jokes in some of the CNCs about the Sperry Financial Network. I'll get offline maybe on that one. But there's nothing. We were never big about trying to promote ourselves. It was really about the company and the group of people we could get together to do amazing things.
Okay. But the bottom line, I think, for someone, you started a company and learned on the job, and you had the good fortune / time to be able to do that.
I think that's the thing. There's lots of good advice over there in company. I would say if I was going to give advice, if you're starting your own company, is try to use as little money as possible. Even though you may be able to go get a lot of money, maybe you have some, maybe friends do, try to be as frugal as you possibly can in the beginning, because those learning that rigor is going to make your company survive, because you'll be stingy. You'll be stingy with your time. You'll be stingy with your resources because you know that it all adds up to something. So treat people right, be frugal. And yes, there are lots of mentors out there that can do some great stuff in training. I didn't have any of that.
Okay. So we've been on an hour and a half. I want to be respectful of Lou's time. Lou also has to get to an airport tonight.
I do.
So we're not going to go for too much longer. So this will be the last call for anybody who wants to vote. And then we'll answer maximum 1 or 2 more questions. It's proof that pay to win works. Well, it works once anyway. You're right. Voting is set up pay to win. You've won the only time it's ever been used, I think. But Awesome Dave's here giving me the thumbs up. So you're helping him test his extension, which is what we're really after.
Like, how was it, 25 cents or so?
Yeah, he spent $1.
$1. Hey,
woo! So
awesome.
yeah.
That's a lot of bucks.
So all right. Well, this one's interesting. Do you have a special morning or bed routine that helps you maximize your personal success during the day?
Yeah. So when I'm being good, I like to start with some sort of physical activity, even if it's just a light activity, some push-ups or something like that, because I like to get the blood going in the morning. And I try very hard. Although my son's game has got me addicted to playing a little bit in the morning, but I try not to do digital stuff in the morning, because I like to go through my head and in my head go through the thoughts of what's in front of me for the day. I might look at my calendar and think through a lot of things. So that helps me quite a bit, just to stay centered. And occasionally, just taking a break and stepping away, take a walk away from a problem, because my schedule gets pretty frantic, and running from thing to thing to thing, you're just not at your best. So maybe even one of the things I actually schedule in my schedule is gaps. I actually put them in the schedule so people won't drop on top of them. They do most often get consumed when I'm not in good behavior, but good behavior is give yourself time to think.
Okay. So I will take the opportunity to ask the last question, which is, what do you think about gamification of things that are not pure video games? In other words, as more and more people become gamers, and as phones now count steps and
Very effective.
and yes, very effective, many other things. What is the role? Are there limits to it? What any opinions you have on gamification?
Well, yeah, I mean, game theory is used for a lot of things, as I'm sure a bunch of the viewers are aware. I think it's important to understand up front what the goal of the gamification is, because what I see happen is people sort of haphazardly stick video game kind of constructs into things that doesn't really make a lot of sense, and it kind of gives the gamification has kind of gotten a bad name for it because of that. But I think there's a lot of compulsion loops or meta loops around things that we do every day. I mean, I love the fact that my language app makes me check in every day and do at least a few exercises, because I stay at it, and I probably wouldn't if I didn't keep track of my everyday progress. I wish there were actually some other loops in it that would make me actually vary my training a little bit instead of just keep doing the same thing, because that's the cheater's way to min-max it. Unfortunately, I'm a game maker, so I'm going to find the hole and min-max it, which is really not the goal. So that kind of happens. But I like the idea that other industries are looking at compulsion loops and reward loops to motivate people. Once again, going back to that, there is a sort of responsibility at some point too. Like Pokemon Go, don't put, Pokemon in the middle of busy intersections, right? You just don't do that. So there's some social responsibility you have to have as well.
That's right. I agree with that. There were definitely stories about Pokemon being in people's yards with bad dogs, and
Exactly.
The problems of location based with imperfect data. So we'll wrap up questions at that point. It's been great having Lou here. Couple quick announcements. I'm going to jump on Devin Nash's stream for the Nash Nation on Labor Day. It seemed like a fun thing to do. I need to catch up with Devin anyway and go hang out with him. So he and I are going to do a Labor Day morning stream. Hashtag never late. We'll start sometime in the morning. Who knows? And then my next stream is Wednesday, September 4th. We have a topic out there. Oh, hey, Furoki. Well, you can catch us. On VOD, please, or on YouTube. And so I'll be back on the 4th at 6:00. I may bump it back to 7. We missed Mugendra's coaching session last night because he was sick. So we may. I'll probably try and put him in that slot if he's available, and we'll move the topic around. But it's great having all my regulars here. I appreciate you. Most of you are in chat right now. Ethernet, Hephaestus. I know that the Rex would be there somewhere. Shadow Fox, our mod. Furoki, hydrate right now, please. Actual name Kyle, but he wanted to be more positive and try and do good for others. Ojo4, new fan Ligerbox. So T Weirdo. Another longtime fan. So thank you all for being here. It's been great fun as always. My thanks to Awesome Dave for lighting up the studio. We have a couple more shows planned here in the future. And with that, everybody have a good night and cheers.
Thank you.